There is a question that should bother you every time you stand in the grocery store, staring at a price tag that is 30% higher than it was 3 years ago. Where is the money going? Because it is not going to the farmer who grew the food. Between 1950 and today, the farmer's share of every dollar spent on food in America has fallen from roughly 50 cents to less than 15 cents. Less than 15 cents of every grocery dollar reaches the person who actually put something in the ground, raised an animal, or harvested a crop. The other 85 cents goes somewhere in a chain between the farm and your cart. And when you follow that 85 cents carefully, what you find is not a system of competitive markets efficiently distributing goods. What you find is a series of choke points, each one controlled by a small number of very large companies, each one collecting a toll, each one protected by decades of regulatory decisions that approved the mergers that created the choke points in the first place. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand not just why your food costs what it costs, but who is collecting the difference between what a farmer earns and what you pay at the register, and why the system that was supposed to feed America cheaply and reliably nearly collapsed when a single virus interrupted it. Let's start at the farm, because the farm is where the story begins and where the most dramatic squeeze has happened. In 1980, there were approximately 2.4 million farms in the United States. Today there are roughly 2 million, and that number significantly overstates the economic diversity of American agriculture, because the farms that remain are not equal. The top 10% of farms by revenue now generate approximately 75% of total agricultural output. The bottom 75% of farms generate less than 5% of output, and most of them lose money on agriculture itself, surviving only because the operators have off-farm income. This consolidation at the farm level is partly a story of technology and efficiency. Larger farms benefit from machinery that smaller farms cannot afford. But it is also a story of what has happened to the markets farmers sell into, because the buyers of what American farmers produce have consolidated far faster than the farms themselves. Take beef. 4 companies, JBS, Tyson Foods, Cargill, and National Beef, process approximately 80% of the beef in the United States. 4 companies. For 80% of the beef supply of a nation of 330 million people, a cattle rancher in Nebraska does not choose among dozens of competing buyers offering different prices. They choose among the processors with plants nearby, and in many regions that means 2 or 3 realistic options at most. When buyers are few and sellers are many, the buyers set the price. That is not ideology. It is basic market structure. And the data confirms it. The spread between the price a packer pays for a live cattle and the price they charge for boxed beef has widened significantly over time. During COVID, when supply chains tightened, the spread widened dramatically. Cattle ranchers watched the price of beef at the grocery store surge, while the price they received for their animals fell. The money was moving through the system. It was stopping somewhere in the middle. A Senate investigation in 2022 found evidence consistent with coordinated pricing behavior among the major packers. Though establishing legal price fixing requires a high evidentiary bar, the Department of Justice opened an investigation. As of the time of this video, no charges have been filed. The 4 companies that control 80% of American beef processing are still the same 4 companies. Now, let's follow the money further up the chain, because the consolidation does not stop at processing. It starts before the farm gate and continues all the way to the register. Seeds. In 1996, there were dozens of independent seed companies in the United States. Today, following a wave of mergers approved by federal regulators, 4 companies control approximately 60% of the global seed market: Bayer, Corteva, ChemChina, and Bass. Many of the seeds these companies sell are patented, meaning farmers cannot save seeds from one harvest to plant the next, as farmers have done for 10,000 years. They must purchase new seeds every season. The price of seeds has increased dramatically over the past 3 decades. Fertilizer. 3 companies control a majority of the North American nitrogen fertilizer market. When natural gas prices spiked in 2021 and 2022, fertilizer prices more than doubled in some markets. Farmers absorb input cost increases before they know what price they will receive for the crop. The risk is entirely on their side of the ledger. Crop insurance. The federal crop insurance program, designed to protect farmers from weather and price volatility, is administered through private insurers who receive federal subsidies and charge premiums that consume a significant share of farm revenue. A Government Accountability Office report found that the crop insurance program's administrative and operating costs represent substantial value flowing to private insurers from public funds. By the time a farmer reaches the market with a product to sell, They have already paid consolidated seed companies, consolidated fertilizer companies, and subsidized private insurers. What they receive for their product is determined by a handful of processors, and then the consumer price is set by a grocery retail sector that has itself consolidated dramatically. The top 4 grocery retailers in the United States, Walmart, Kroger, Costco, and Amazon through Whole Foods, now account for roughly 65% of grocery sales. Kroger's proposed merger with Albertsons, 2 of the largest chains, would have further concentrated that market. The FTC challenged it. A federal judge blocked it in 2024. The FTC cited concerns about the effect on both workers and grocery prices in markets where the combined entity would face little competition. The merger was blocked. But the attempt itself illustrates the persistent direction of consolidation pressure in the sector. Now, let's run the actual numbers on a specific product to make this concrete. A pound of ground beef that costs $6 at the grocery store. The breakdown of where that money goes is estimated by agricultural economists across multiple studies. The retailer collects somewhere between 25% and 35% as gross margin. On a $6 product, call it $1.80. The packer, the entity that processes, cuts, packages, and distributes, collects the largest single share, often 40 to 50% of the retail price. On a $6 product, that is approximately $2.70. The cattle rancher who raised the animal receives, after subtracting their feed, land, labor, and equipment costs, somewhere in the range of $1 to $1.50. On a product that retails for $6, the entity that processes the meat, for roughly 72 hours collects nearly twice what the rancher who raised the animal for 2 years receives. That is not a market failure in the traditional sense. It is the mathematically predictable outcome of a market structure, where processors have pricing power over both the farmers selling to them and the retailers buying from them. Now here is the moment where the fragility of this system became impossible to ignore. March 2020 COVID-19 begins spreading through meatpacking facilities. Because beef, pork, and poultry processing is physically intensive, requires workers in close proximity, and is concentrated in a small number of very large plants. The virus moved through the workforce rapidly. JBS closed its Greeley, Colorado beef plant. Smithfield Foods closed plants. Tyson closed plants. Within weeks, roughly 25% of American pork processing capacity had been taken offline. Grocery store meat cases went empty. Prices spiked. The president invoked the Defense Production Act to force plants to stay open, a decision that coincided with continued worker illness and deaths. And the central lesson of the crisis was one that consolidation experts had been warning about for decades. Efficiency and resilience are not the same thing. A system optimized for efficiency concentrates production in the fewest possible locations, runs the thinnest possible inventories, and eliminates redundant capacity. It is maximally efficient in normal conditions, and maximally fragile when anything goes wrong. The American food processing system, built on decades of merger approvals and consolidation, had traded resilience for efficiency and discovered in the spring of 2020 what that trade actually cost. The empty meat cases were not a supply problem in the traditional sense. There were cattle, there were hogs, there were chickens. There were not enough processing plants distributed broadly enough to handle the product. When the concentrated plants went down, the vulnerability was structural, and it was chosen one merger at a time over the preceding 4 decades. Now, let's talk about the historical parallel, because this story has been told before, just with different characters. In 1906, Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, a novel depicting the conditions in the Chicago meatpacking industry. The book's impact was not primarily what Sinclair intended. He wanted to expose the exploitation of immigrant workers. What the public responded to was the food safety implications, and the political response was the Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. Both passed the same year. But the other issue Sinclair documented was market power. The meatpacking trusts, Swift, Armour, Morris, and others, controlled the processing infrastructure and used that control to extract from farmers above them and consumers below them. The Federal Trade Commission investigated them in 1919. The Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 was specifically designed to prevent anti-competitive behavior in livestock and poultry markets. The legislation was explicit about the structural problem and the remedy. And then, over the following decades, the enforcement weakened, the mergers were approved, and the concentration rebuilt itself into a structure that makes the meatpacking trusts of 1906 look like a moderately competitive market by comparison. The Roosevelt-era antitrust apparatus broke these concentrations up once. The Reagan-era revision of merger review standards allowed them to be rebuilt in a single generation. What took decades to dismantle was reconstructed in 20 years. And we are now living with the prices, the farmer incomes, and the fragility that the reconstruction produced. So what do you actually do with this? Because the system is large and the levers are mostly held by people who are not in the grocery store with you. First, understand that food prices are not primarily an inflation story, though inflation contributed. They are a market structure story. The same product at 50% more money, with the farmer receiving less per unit, means the margin is expanding somewhere in the middle of the chain. Knowing where that margin lives changes how you think about proposed policy solutions. Subsidizing consumers does not fix the structural problem. Addressing the structural problem addresses the structural problem. Second, the farmers market and the direct-to-consumer movement are not just lifestyle preferences. They are structural bypasses. When a rancher sells directly to a consumer, the packer spread disappears. The farmer captures more. The consumer pays less. The intermediary is removed. This is not scalable to feed 330 million people, but for the portion of your grocery spending, where it is feasible, it is a direct vote against the intermediary layer. Third, understand that the regulatory decisions that approved these mergers were made by real agencies, under administrations of both parties, applying standards that have been contested by economists for decades. The question of whether a merger increases efficiency enough to justify its market concentration is not answered by the merging companies. It is answered by regulators, and the quality of those regulatory decisions is directly proportional to the political independence and resourcing of those agencies. That is a governance question, not just a food policy question. So I want to hear where you land. Do you think the consolidation of the American food system is a natural and efficient outcome of market competition that produces lower costs and reliable supply despite the occasional fragility event? But regulatory failure that has handed market power to a small number of companies at the expense of farmers, workers, and consumers simultaneously. Or C, a complicated trade-off where the efficiency gains from scale are real but have been captured almost entirely by processors and retailers rather than passed through to the people at either end of the chain. Drop your take in the comments because the range of opinion on agricultural economics is wider than most people expect, and the data cuts in directions that challenge everybody's priors. And the next time you are standing at the meat case, looking at a price that feels impossible, and wondering why farming communities are struggling while your grocery bill is higher than ever, the answer is not that someone made a mistake. Someone made a series of very deliberate decisions about which mergers to approve and which markets to leave uncontested. And the gap between the farm gate price and the retail sticker is the accumulated return on those decisions. It is just not accumulating where most people think it is.